Started, and we're going to put this in presentation mode. All right. So we have, let me see, a number of people on. For those of you who can hear us, I am Debbie, and this is Elisa, and we're very excited to have you. If you can hear okay, and you want to put something in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and say good morning. We are just about to get started. It is 9 o'clock, and hopefully everybody can hear us. Oh, good. I know Destiny can. So that's great. And let's see, we have a number of people on. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I know people are just starting to come in. So I'm going to go ahead and give it just one more minute. And I'm going to look at the chat really quickly. Good morning. I'm assuming everybody else can hear us. I'm going to move these over here. Well, I am Debbie Rosen, as I said, and I'm going to go ahead and give a proper introduction to Elisa here in just a moment. But I thought we would start. Oh, thank you, Katie. Appreciate that. I thought we would start by doing a quick introduction for those people who may or may not know the Study Pro. So we are an executive function and study skill center. And rather than all of the bullets that you see here, I really like to say that it's interesting, I think, how much you'll have in common with what we do here, and at least of what you'll talk about today. We really, what walks in this door or comes through the Zoom, for those people we work with remotely, are kids that are super smart and super capable and feel all kinds of big feelings and sometimes still struggle, even though they're super smart and super capable, with doing things like getting started or making a plan, or inhibiting. And so therefore, their goals suffer and they're having a harder time reaching the goals that we know that they have, but they don't know exactly why. And so really the theme of this morning, both from the Study Pro, I think, and certainly what you're going to hear from Lisa, is really helping to unpack that. And that's really what we do here, is we really help to unpack that for families and for kids especially. We also help kids here in our homework center. There are people that are local to actually get the work done while they're developing the skills. So we help them build their plans and help them work their plans and help them practice doing their work without their phones and while they're estimating time and while they're advocating. And so a lot of what we're doing is helping them to identify where they may have some missing skills, so it feels more normalized for them, like, oh, it's not just that I'm not smart anymore, but that really that I'm discovering that these are just skills that I can build. And so we've been doing that now for 10 years. You might see these little logos here in the now left corner. And we're expanding in terms of how we're helping kids do that. So we actually have now a new AI workshop. We do this for both parents as well as students, high school students specifically. And basically what we do in the AI workshop is to help students with the 5 areas that they find the most challenging in school. So what is it that is blocking me, or a barrier to start my work, to better understand the material, to prepare, to improve? And how can I use AI as a way to help me develop executive function skills? So how can I put all of this information into, of all the things I have to do that I can't prioritize on my own, and have, for example, ChatGPT help me, or have specialized AI tools help me visually see some of the content that I might not understand, or help me create active study strategies for preparing. So one of the things we know about AI is that it can be misused, but what we want to do is help students to use it in a way that actually builds their critical thinking skills. And so that's really what we're doing here in this workshop. We have one November 2nd, which is this weekend. The last one, I think one of the last 2 we have for this calendar year for high school students. And then we also do a workshop for parents who want to better help their students to learn how to do this, but maybe their students are resistant, or maybe they have never used AI And so if you're somebody who has maybe never used AI, and are curious, how can I better help my student rather than just asking, hey, do you have homework? That's really what we're trying to do, is to help you see what the barriers are for starting, understanding, preparing, and then how can you better share some of these tools with your student, and also be more empathetic in terms of the path and the journey they're on in terms of doing all this work. I can tell you the work that students are doing today are a lot different than what they had been doing in the past. Um, we also have a free workshop coming up on November 15th, for high school students on how to get unstuck and write. So specifically focused on how do I initiate, plan, organize when I have an overwhelming writing assignment, and that is free. So you can use the QR code here, sign up for that, or certainly always email us info@thestudypro.com. And if you're on this mailing list, if you signed up today, you'll be getting more about that as well. So we have two very exciting upcoming webinars. Penny Williams is a coach and author, but she also started something called the Signals system, where it's about listening to the signals of your kids. We're going to hearing some of that today. What is the emotion actually telling you? And so what is that telling you about behavior? So she's going to be speaking on November 20th. And then something, one of my favorites, it's just for really parents, like from triggers to tools, how can we reduce the conflict that we have at home? And actually, I just met with Nicole the other day, and we spent a good day planning not only this, but also a parent follow-up session so that we can actually have a parent workshop here at Study Pro with Nicole. So we'll be telling you more about that in the upcoming weeks. So with that, I do want to introduce our very, very special guest, which is Elisa Nebolsine. And she and I have known each other for a very long time now. Oh boy, I won't go into how exactly, but when you were in another office where physically, and I was going there with my kids, but certainly you have just unbelievable amount of experience. What I really appreciate about everything that you do is how you bring the compassion and you join that with science. And you also share very, very specific tools to take complex ideas from CBT, from DBT, from all the other realms, and bring them together in very practical and truly relatable skills for families. And so I'm very excited that you're going to be sharing very specific tools from all of your books, but from the Thoughts and Feelings workbook for teens. And I will say, as a last thing before I turn things over to you, is that one of the things that you said, which I won't give away, it's just a little bit of a spoiler alert, is something that I share all the time with parents now in terms of teen brain development. So I'm very excited for everybody here to hear about that today. And I'm going to stop my share and let you share.
Thank you.
And while you're doing that quickly, I just want to tell everyone that please put your questions in the chat. I will capture them and I will ensure that we answer them towards the end. We won't probably stop in the middle just for our timing perspective. But Elisa, I see your screen, but the screen is your text, which probably is not the one you wanted to share.
That's interesting because we were doing it before, right? Does this look better? No.
No, do you have like share your entire screen?
I'm going to stop it and start it again. Sorry. Share.
And does it have like, or just Chrome? Oh, there we go. Yeah, it's
I
perfect.
think I hit the wrong thing. Sorry.
That's okay.
Let's start at the beginning. There we go. Is that good? You got it?
Yes, that's perfect for me.
Okay.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
put myself on mute and turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thanks. Okay. I appreciate it, Debbie, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm really worried that I'm not going to say the thing that you were just talking about that's a spoiler alert because I'm not sure what it is. So
You will, I promise.
Okay.
And when you do, I'll tell you.
Okay, good. Because I was like, oh no, expectations. So I am really excited to talk about why your teens' emotions feel so big and what actually helps, because this is such a normal part of development and yet a time that feels so hard for both teens and for parents. And there's a lot of things we can do. And one of those things is, to understand the brain, because there's a lot we know about the brain. And my hope is always that teens get to understand this as well, kind of like a user's manual for your brain, because this is as this becomes more known, as this knowledge is put out there, I think it really normalizes a lot of experiences and can make things easier for teens and for parents and for everyone around them. So we're going to look today at the development of the brain. We're going to look at how emotions are amplified during this time period. And that's going to be just an ongoing theme. It's just huge. That emotion outpaces logic. In other words, um, our brains are built to survive. Evolution has made sure of that. And so the evolutionary part of our brain, the limbic system, the back parts of our brain are going to mature faster than the thought parts. And there are going to be gaps in the connections during adolescence. And that's real. We're going to talk about how your calm helps your teen's neurosystem find their calm, which is kind of a lot of pressure, but I hopefully will be able to make it not feel that way. Just the basics about neurotransmitters. There's this central idea, and this really comes from Lisa Nebolsine, and I have one of her books listed at the end, so you can have that as a reference. I think she's really amazing for this topic, but it's that being emotional does not mean you're fragile. And I think that is such a cultural idea. But the problem with that is that when we can't express emotion, it becomes internal. So being able to say that emotion is not fragility, emotion is necessary and developmental, and it looks different at different life stages, and it looks kind of intense in the adolescent years. Emotions are also important and necessary. They are data points, they are information, they tell us things that we need to know. So we have to be able to recognize them and learn from them. And that is obviously harder when you're feeling emotions in a really big way. I'm also going to tell you that I was literally playing with this PowerPoint until we started. And so I hope I didn't change the order too much because I always kind of get a little perfectionistic and then regret it. So we're going to start with this idea that emotions mature well before the parts of the brain that regulate and interpret emotions. So the analogy that is often used is, and Frances Jensen, who wrote a wonderful book, also listed at the end about this, she's a neuroscientist, is that you have this very fancy sports car that's like super fast and super cool, but the brakes don't work very well, which would be enormously problematic, right? So it's like you have these huge emotions, but you can't really modulate them in the way you need to be able to. You don't have the fine tuning yet. And that is something that is so hard for teens. It's so hard for us around them, but it's also so hard for teens. The idea is that, and this is factual, that 80% of the teen brain is wired and 20% is not wired. And what that means is that all the structures in your brain exist. But during the teen years, there's this whole kind of revolutionary change, this rewiring, this really exciting transformation that's occurring. And the wiring is going to take a little while. So 80% wired sounds pretty good until you think about the parts that aren't connected yet and that have to build, and what a huge deficit that is for kids and just gaps that occur because of it. We're going to look at that and some strategies for helping with that process. This is kind of the basic, very sophisticated diagram about teen brain development. So back to front development. The back of our brain is kind of more base level things functioning. And again, that's about survival. In the middle, we have the limbic system, which is all about emotion. And in the front, the PFC, prefrontal cortex, is where we do all these great planning, impulse control, judgment, the things that Debbie was just talking about in terms of executive functioning. Those are all right in the front. And those two regions are not fully connected to each other. They're not fully talking to each other. And so I don't know if you've read The Body Keeps Score. It's a wonderful book about trauma. But one of the things that Bessel van der Kolk is, I think that's right, or is it Gabor? No, it's Bessel van der Kolk, talks about in it is we want a mohawk. So limbic system, prefrontal cortex, we want a connection path between the two. And that connection path has to kind of work back and forth and build and get stronger. And so it actually looks like a mohawk in a functional MRI, which is where he got it. But I think it's a wonderful just metaphor for what we're trying to build for kids so that they can make those connections. And there's a biological reason, there's a process that has to happen, but we can help speed that up. This is the part that's a bummer. I mean, there's so many studies, and this was a really neat one. This is UCLA, but think it came out of a NIMH funded study where they were looking at healthy brains over a period of time, though, the decade of the brain, where they did a lot of monitoring of brains and just watching how they progressed. And what you see here is the executive function part of the brain, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is the last to develop. It's the slowest part. So that's kind of a problem because that's where you get a lot of the control, the organization, the planning, the inhibition. And it's just factual that that's going to be slower. And if we know that, and if kids know that, they can build compensatory strategies to some extent. And maybe we and they can have a little more grace with themselves. I always think that's important, is that we don't get into these. It's so easy to just be so frustrated and blame. And maybe when we understand more what's going on, it changes it and it changes our interactions.
Can I
Another,
just interrupt you, Elisa, to
yeah.
say that you've already then said what I was, that was the big Easter egg. That
Oh,
what I walked away with last time that I'd never heard before was that because the emotional part of the brain is so much more developed than their management side of the brain, which I'd seen before, but I never really thought about it that way. Their emotions are in charge.
they
So
are,
like
right?
that's what, so parents, you can, not, you should hang up now, but like, wow, that just blew
Done.
me away last time. I was done. I was like, wow, that they have
Yeah.
the Ferrari engine with bicycle brakes, right?
Yes. Yes. And it's like they don't compare. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. I think that's fascinating too. And once you get that, it just changes how you relate to kids, I think. I don't know if my kids would say that, but hopefully they would. How I relate to other people's kids. So another piece here is that peers have enormous influence. And when we talk about emotions, the reason I was kind of debating whether or not to include the peer piece here, but I think a lot of conflict with parents is around peers, right? Because peers get prioritized. There's so much about communication, about seeing people. And one thing to understand is that in an adolescent's brain, it feels really different to the need for peer connection at this age. This is one study. There are like a million of these studies that are really interesting. So teens and adults are playing a driving game when they played alone and their brains are scanned in an fMRI. Those are those kind of research tools that show it's like an MRI, but shows it in video form. And the teens had, so then one time they're playing it alone and then they're playing it with friends watching. And the teens' brains lit up in the reward center, like the ventral striatum and orbitofrontal cortex, when their peers were watching, but the adults did not. And there are a number of studies that look at the teen influence comes up again and again from peers in a way that does not happen with adults. And we talk about peer pressure. I kind of hate peer pressure because I feel like we've made that, it's just such a like trivialized term and it's such a big deal. It's so real. Kids do things in groups they would never do on their own. And there is a drive to be a part of a group that is unique to this time. It is so heightened. And so the heightened reward response, kind of the part of your brain feeling this, actually made for riskier driving because they wanted to get more reward. They wanted their friends to see it. And I don't know if that surprises anyone, but that's pretty scary when you think about kids out driving. There was actually one study that looked at kids driving who, if they thought of a policeman in their head or their parent, if they visualized it, they slowed down. I mean, really interesting kinds of pieces, but hard to overstate the importance of peers. This one's really funny because I wrote about this study in my book about the brain, and my youngest daughter is in college, and she called me and she was like, "Oh my God, you are going to love this study. It is so cool." And I was like, "Wait, you said you had read the book." She had totally never read the book because it was in there. Pretty typical. So rejection feels different, and this for her was like so powerful, and she and resonated with her so much, which is that feeling rejection hurts so much. And I think as adults, we have a tendency to say, like, "Oh my gosh, you're so dramatic. Like, oh, it seems like such a big deal." But literally in their brains, it is registering as a much bigger deal and creating more pain. You just get really high activation in these areas of the brain that show emotional pain and dysregulation. And you're going to see there's so many things that contribute to dysregulation. And our expectation is that they are regulating their emotions, they're in control, they're doing all these things. And the goal is to get there, but I hope that through this we can understand different ways of helping them get there and understand why it is so hard for them. Um, Inhibition is really hard for teenagers. Another study, I love these studies. So this is at University of Pittsburgh, and the participants had to inhibit, so not do the eye movement. They had to look away when certain images appear on a screen. That's really hard to do. And teens could do it as well as adults, but they had to use way more of their brain. So whereas adults could use their frontal lobes and it's easy, you can do it, the teen brain was really active, which means it's more effortful, which means it's harder to do, which means there's like a lower, you can't do it as long. It's less difficult, it's more difficult to engage with it. It's less rewarding. Inhibition is really hard at this age, and that certainly relates to emotional regulation. So then we go into just the chemical kind of piece here. I think dopamine is so famous right now. It's kind of cool how it's like everywhere. But at the onset of puberty, dopamine is super high. It goes down as you get older, but it is like encouraging you to do things when you learn things that are interesting, when you feel good. It just is so reinforcing. It's about rewarding what feels good. And that can be a problem. I mean, that can be great, but it can also be a problem. So lots of things feel really good that aren't always as good for us. One of the interesting things that I think about is this idea of learning as being reinforced and the risk of substances. When kids are adolescents, if they become addicted to different substances, it is learned in a different way and can be much more difficult in the future because it gets reinforced and integrated in your brain differently. So it's almost like a form of learning that occurs, and everything is intensely pleasurable and therefore more reinforceable. And I say that not to terrify you. I say that just because I think we need to know that this risk is going to have a chemical reinforcement, and we need to be on top of that. That also, so other things with dopamine is kids will do risky behaviors, like the car thing we just talked about, and the ongoing prioritization of doing things with other people and not missing out. Not missing out. That is huge. Then we go into serotonin and SSRIs, right? We know about those. Serotonin levels actually decrease in early puberty, which is such a bummer because it helps us manage anxiety, stress, and mood. And when we have less serotonin, it's harder to regulate emotions. You're going to see this is yet another thing that makes it harder for kids to regulate emotion. And this is more pronounced at the younger ages, just kind of post-pubescent. But lower serotonin is related to depression, loneliness, stress, unhappiness. There's a lot there. And so it's a number of factors coming in for kids that feels pretty bad. When there are lower levels of serotonin, it's difficulty calming down and self-regulating, which you're hearing that all over. Increased aggression, irritability, and depression. Depression looks different often in adolescents than in adults, and that kind of irritability and uninhibited responses can be something that comes out and is a symptom. And then these greater feelings of anxiety and stress. So we've got all of these neurochemistry kind of pieces happening, and then we have hormones. And this part is like crazy. One of the things that I learned when I was working in the brain book was that hormones are latent in our bodies from birth. Maybe everybody knew this. I didn't know this. And that they just become activated when we reach puberty. And so it's like having 16 espressos for me. Like I would be losing my mind. And that's kind of what's happening is, especially in the early stages, they are getting flooded with hormones without a tolerance for them. And that feels terrible. I actually am working with a couple women right now who recently had babies and a couple women in menopause. And what's so interesting is to talk about hormonal changes and the way it feels with them versus talking to a teen about it, because it's hard for everyone, but the adults have the ability to use language to understand it in a different way. There is that mohawk, that integration of logic and emotion, and it makes it much different. It's really been a fascinating experience to see this. And the goal then to me is that we need teens to be able to understand this in a real way and have language to communicate. Teens have a reverse response to THP, which is a hormone that makes our brain calm down. They actually get wired from it. mean, it's such a bummer, all these things, and we get so mad at them because honestly, they're really difficult and annoying, but they got a lot going on. So last one with this is estrogen and progesterone. So the first 2 weeks of a woman's cycle, especially when they're younger, is easier because there's more dopamine and serotonin. But then the second 2 weeks has more progesterone and less estrogen, which is really tricky and makes you kind of feel irritable or anxious and sad. And this is emphasized when you've just entered puberty. So that's like half of the month is really difficult. That's significant. That's a lot of time. That gets easier over time. And then there's testosterone. By the end of puberty, boys have 30 times more testosterone that has kind of been released in their bodies and they're living with. And the amygdala, the fight or flight part of our brain in the limbic system, has receptors that are like, hey, I love testosterone. It's like friends with testosterone, which is fascinating because then you think about, okay, inhibition is hard, emotions are rampant. And for young men, we see more aggressive behavior, we see more reactivity, and that is actually a biological function that is happening. Um, I always, as I say this, my hope is always not to say behavior is okay, but also to have more understanding of why kids do what they do. So, kind of overview here with the brain. We've got abundant dopamine, we've got a not fully connected PFC, and we have overall less cognitive control. That is a bit of a setup. That is really hard for anyone. That's especially hard for people who are also getting just kind of thrown all these emotions, whose hormones and neurotransmitters are not supporting this. I mean, it's just a storm. So what do you do to help them? And this is where we as parents can do things. And I'm going to share ideas. Um, the idea is also that we as parents are fallible. We do really dumb things, at least I do. And a part of this learning is making mistakes, owning them, talking them over with your kid, figuring out how to do it differently next time. But there's no expectation of perfection, just like we don't expect perfection from our kids. It's kind of we are working together in support of each other. And how do we get there? And looking at our own emotions and evaluating. So, this is something that everybody gets mad at me about, but I'm going to say it. The most effective intervention is sleep, 8 to 10 hours a night. And I understand it is not possible. I get that 100%. If kids are doing sports and they have homework, how are they supposed to do it? We know and have seen over and over in the studies that if there's a later start time for high schools, that there are less car accidents, there's less depression, there are higher test scores. I mean, it's just like black and white clear. But sleep is protective against just about everything. And when you're getting less than 7 hours, you're seeing almost a 50% increase in risk of depression and anxiety. And that's not uncommon around here. Sleep really has to be a priority. Exercise, getting 45 minutes cardio. A lot of kids don't do that. There are some kids who get way more. What I've seen actually that's interesting to me is when I work with anxious or kids with a tendency towards depression and they're athletes, if they get injured or if there's a couple weeks in between, this is usually college level, in between like a season, their mood will go down. The exercise is that protective. It's also cool because we can predict it and we can plan for it. But it shows just clearly how important that part is for managing things. Because I can give you a million strategies and all these different things, but there is a reality that our bodies need certain things. We are humans. And then nutrition, healthy and balanced diet. So those would be the most effective. If I go on from that, the second thing we got, that's an oxygen mask. I'm worried it feels like kind of scary, but it's an oxygen mask, and it's the idea of, the airplane thing of when the oxygen mask drops, you've got to put it on yourself first so you can take care of your kids. That is very true for adolescents. Parents do have to be taking care of themselves. They have to feel like they're getting enough sleep and exercise, and they are doing the things that support their mental health. If I sit like I always feel guilty saying this, but I also think that it becomes motivating that parental mental health is really important in terms of predictor for success for kids. And I don't say that in terms of like guilting. I say that in terms of it's worth making an effort because any change is better. Um, And when we are doing better, we do better for our kids. So really making the time to do what you need to do to feel calm and in control and happy with your life. Um, Being a teen with intense emotions can feel all of the above. They could probably feel like a million other feelings as well, right? Like just overwhelming, sad, powerless, so mad, embarrassed, ashamed, lonely, confused, all of these things. But parenting a teen with these emotions can feel the same way. And we focus often on the teens, but this is really, really hard to do. When your teen or your child rejects you, it's just awful, and one of the things we talk about is it's the connection between the PFC and the limbic system that's the issue. The structures are there, meaning the logic and the reasoning are there. They're just harder to access with emotions. What seems to me to be true is when teens are in these moments of intense emotion and so overwhelmed with them, they can be so cruel. They can say such cutting things, like, they know how to get to you, and they say it in an uninhibited way that they would not normally say, and that can be so triggering and so painful. And I bring that up because you're not alone. Parents go through this, and I hope parents talk to each other and support each other and laugh about how bad it feels and are serious about how bad it feels, because this is hard stuff. And the more we get support, the more we're going to be able to help our kids. So, coming back to that idea I started with Lisa Demore, being emotional does not mean being fragile. Being emotional is crucial. What I see is when people are not able to express emotions, they come out. I think it's I think it's Jurassic Park, and I think there's a line something like, I'm not sure I got it right, but it's like life will find a way. And I always think of emotions will find a way. What we suppress is not gone. It is internalized and it still needs to come out. And maybe that is panic attacks. Maybe that is losing in different situations. Maybe that is sadness and withdrawal. Emotion needs to be expressed, and we and our children need the tools to be able to talk about things and feel them. I think this is changing. I think this generation is much more open to it than my generation, and it's less kind of trivialized. I've certainly been really excited about people like the gymnast Simone Biles, or even Prince Harry, people who are talking, these celebrities who talk about mental health struggles in a real way. I think that if we can change the culture of how we talk about this, it doesn't feel like such a big ask. It doesn't feel so weird to start talking about emotions differently. And to come back to this other point, emotional intensity is normal. This is a part of adolescence. It is developmentally appropriate. It's not dysfunctional. We want them to feel, and then we want them to be able to work through the feelings. We want to feel, and we want to be able to work through our feelings. Doesn't mean you can act any way you want, right? We're working on that regulation piece, but all of the feelings are important, and feelings serve different needs. So in CBT, we talk about anxiety is overestimation of risk, underestimation of resources. When we think about anger, we think about protection of self. When we think about sadness, it's about knowing what is meaningful and experiencing the loss of that. There are real reasons for these emotions, and when we connect our experience of them to the way they play out in our world, we can often make sense of them and work through them differently. I love this. When I get sad, I look at this and think about this. Has anyone ever said, I feel like it's so common to be like, oh, it'll get better, and that's okay. But sometimes it is just okay to be sad. And sometimes it is okay to be mad. I think it's much harder to say it's okay to be mad. I think that is a really threatening emotion. But it's okay to feel these things. And when we give ourselves permission to feel them, we move through them in a different way than when we're trying not to show them, or when somebody's telling us just to see the bright side of things. It's okay to feel. Um, so I kind of said this one already because I was not even remembering that it was here, but that emotions are information, and that they serve a point. And you could go, I think Inside Out actually did this so well, where it's kind of there are these set emotions that we all have, core emotions, and that they all serve as information. And Inside Out does that lovely job with literally giving voice to those experiences. Okay, so then what do you do as a parent? And how do you start working on this? Here's the fancy word, which is biological synchrony. What we're going to do here, and what I'm asking of you, which is so hard, is to try and mirror the state you want to be showing with the goal of your child's nervous system reacting. And I think I said that in a confusing way. When you can be calm in the moment, you, especially as a caring person in their life, there is a phenomenon called sync up, where you start, as your heart rate is slower, as you're calmer, your child starts to have that response. And when they do, they get a release of oxytocin, which, is like released when we're breastfeeding, when we're having these close moments with people, when we're connecting in deep and meaningful ways. And so they get this hormone that makes them feel closer to you and feel safer. And it also reduces cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It's hard to do, and it's hard to do effectively without being snarky, at least for me. But it is totally possible. So they talk about it. The ideal thing is a nurturing exchange. So it's that you have this steady tone. You're not like annoying calm, but you're like steady. You're real. If they will let you, a gentle touch and calm body language. And what's interesting here is that is read nervous system to nervous system. So when we talk about kind of processing information, this is one of those, I'm going to use the word primal, like, but just a less language based, more immediate kind of thing that can happen that doesn't take all of the thinking. It is regulating the way we have regulated with our children over the years. We do it when they're younger automatically. And I think it is so provocative when they're teens that it's much harder, but it's the same idea. So when I was writing this, I was like, what's the difference between co-regulation and syncing up? And this is just technical if you have heard these terms. So co-regulation is kind of the way you can help another person calm down. So it's the act of providing this calm, supportive presence. And syncing up is more the biological process of how our bodies start to match each other. I put a yoga class because it's like if you're in yoga and you guys are all chill and everything's like great, and then somebody walks in and they're all stressed out and they come late and they're slamming down their mat, right? You can feel it that way too, where you start to get tighter. Before that, there was this lovely calmness that you're all feeling. We do, as humans, as mammals, we do have a contagious kind of response to each other, and that is not conscious. That just happens with our bodies feeling safe. And your teen does not feel safe when they're losing it. They don't. And they're not going to say that because they're angry and they're bitter and the world feels terrible, but they're also not feeling safe. And we can help provide that. Okay, Serenity Now. This is from Seinfeld, and it's George is like the character, and his dad has high blood pressure, I believe, and he gets a mantra from his doctor, and it's about trying to calm himself down. But what he does is he goes around saying "Serenity now" and like losing it, like "Serenity now," and you can watch him get more and more tense, and that's really a risk here. Is as we try to do this, are we going to lose it? And how do we let ourselves be real about this without getting into this kind of super tense, hard thing? This is one of my secrets to life. You'll see another one in here. The way I practice this idea with kids is I ask them to call me stupid. And that's really hard. They don't want to do it. But okay, so let's say they do it. They're like, "You're stupid." And I'm like, "No, you're stupid." I make them mad, which often can trigger, I don't think it would trigger in an adult, but can also often trigger in them, oh my God, you're really stupid. Like something where it gets bigger. So it's like I throw it at them, they throw it back at me, and it's bigger. And that repeats and gets bigger and bigger. And this is very typical when we are feeling defensive. And if our beloved child is attacking us in a way that is so wounding and so personal, they are throwing it at us, we are throwing it back, and it grows and grows and grows. And that can happen without even thought. And that's not great co-regulation, but it is real and it happens a lot. So what do we do with that? One of the big things is, this is a Japanese snow tunnel. I'm obsessed with this Japanese snow tunnel. I use this in my work like daily. So these are, I don't even know, they dig them out in Japan, and I hope it's safe to go through, but they go through them. Okay. And the way I think about these Japanese snow tunnels are we have paths in our brain. My example always is my youngest had terrible kidney surgery when she was little, and she was in the hospital for a very long time, and it was so awful and so scary. And when I go into a hospital now, if I don't prep myself, I will start crying without thought. And it's that smell, that memory comes right away. And it's not even something I was thinking about or aware of. That smell triggers it, and immediately it feels awful again. But if I can remind myself, like, she's great, it's all okay, everything's better, I'm going to feel that, it's going to happen, I'm going to want to cry, but that's just that old path in my brain. And what I mean by that is that when we have thoughts, when we have experiences, we form paths in our brain. Neurons come together and connect, and they get thicker and thicker. And the more we do something, the more we experience it, the deeper the path. And while we want the path to just disappear, it often stays there. So the reason I bring this up is that when you are working on this lovely co-regulation, when you are kind of modeling all of these behaviors, you are going to have moments where, without meaning to, without thought, you are going to react like the little angry faces. You're going to lose it. And if you can remember in that moment, wait, that's my snow path. That is old. I'm in a different place now. It is remarkable how we can shift out of that period of just feeling so mad and back where we were and into, no, actually, I'm doing it differently now. And I say that because I think it's a universal experience. And I don't think it's an experience that requires blame. It is being human. We all have that. And so we have to build a new snow path. And that means that we are starting to change our thoughts. We're starting to change our behavior. And that is effortful. And our brain is like, whoa, I'd much rather have this one. Pull back to this one. Pull back to working on it. It really works. So when we're doing this, you're going to start with connecting, not correcting. So hard not to correct, but find a way to connect, validate, listen, be curious. You're going to be calm. And again, your calm is contagious. You're going to normalize the emotion instead of judging it, instead of being like, oh my God, you're being so dramatic, you're overreacting. It's like, yeah, it sounds like that feels really bad. I can understand. And instead of saying you must have control, you're going to stay curious and connect about what is going on with them and their experience. I hope that makes sense. I always have to throw in Carl Rogers here. He's an old psychologist, a humanist, and he talked about unconditional positive regard. And we really do need to show this for our teens. A conditional response would be showing disapproval, withdrawing affection if the kid doesn't act the way you want. I think we all have done this at times, right? But unconditional is accepting the feelings and mistakes and knowing that they have the inner resources to grow and learn. He is the one who kind of made us separate the behavior from the child. When I can channel him, when I can say unconditional positive regard, which I do, it is so much more helpful, because as parents, the correcting is about trying to, for me, save them. Like, oh my God, I know what's happening here. I can fix this. And that tends not to work as well. If I can come back to unconditional positive regard, if I can stay curious, and if I can show the ways that I care about them, that I believe in them. I know it can feel cheesy, but this is important stuff. And it's not instinctual at this age. We do it all the time when they're younger. But if you can find ways to tell them you believe in them, you trust them, you know they have the ability, that you're there for help, that you will listen, that you will care for them, and that they are unconditionally loved and valued. Teenagers invite rejection in so many different ways, and we need to make sure we are not allowing ourselves to be rejected, that we are coming back to that unconditional positive regard and seeing that in them. Easier said than done. And now, because I'm absolutely terrible with time, I'm going to show you some skill building tools. I'm not going to be able to show you all of them, but I'm going to go through them just pretty briefly. Name to tame. So feelings have to be named. That piece about language, though, and I'll say more about this. There's a UCLA study where you had to touch a giant hairy spider. Oh, and the idea is that you have to find a way to get yourself to actually touch this horrific, gross thing. And the people who are most able to do it are the people who don't do like I do, like, They are the people who use language. This looks really scary, but they wouldn't put it in a study if it was going to hurt me. I can do hard things. Those kinds of things, who narrate themselves through it, that self-talk, And if you use your own name when you do it, it's even more effective. Like Elisa, you're not going to be killed by the spider because that would be a lawsuit for them. Elisa, you've done really hard things. I listen differently in my brain when that happens, which I think is really neat. So naming the feeling to tame it, you can help teens learn that. You can help yourself learn that because I don't think any of us are great at that. This is another study out of it. These guys are doing interesting work at UCLA where you're lying down, and if you see an angry face in the MRI machine, your limbic system lights up. But when you name it, there's a decrease, and that's kind of building that mohawk. So I've named it, I've used language, and now I'm starting that path back and forth between limbic and frontal cortex. That's the path we need for regulation. That has to be built. So language is everything with that. I also use a lot of coping strategies. This is something, I'm very CBT based, and we love CBT is cognitive. So we love the thoughts, facts, not feelings. Just because it feels true doesn't mean it is. What are the facts? I say that a lot. My favorite is this one. Whenever something's really bad, like I remember when my dog died and I woke up and thought, I will never be happy again. This is temporary. I can get through, like this one for me, just knowing it will end is the biggest one. Everybody's got a different one. Like I could do a million of these and we all resonate with different ones. I had it on a keychain for a while because I would look at it so much. This is temporary. It's okay to be uncomfortable. If I had more time, I would go into this because life is uncomfortable. Our teens have to be uncomfortable. We have to be uncomfortable, not rescuing them from the discomfort. That is just such an important piece that I'm worried about in this moment in time. And then a few other strategies here about managing this. Don't believe everything you think because our thoughts get really wacky when we're in high emotional states. And then I'm going to get done in 2 minutes. There's a DBT skill, dialectical behavior therapy. They do all these acronyms, and this is a really nice one, which is just stop. So I visualize a stop sign, and it is take a step back, and I will literally do that. It gives me a different perspective. I'm going to observe myself. I'm going to observe the person. I'm going to observe the situation in my mind, and I'm going to move forward with mindfulness. Hard to do, but when you've done it a few times, it gets easier. ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, has a very similar one, which is FACE. And that's kind of what's in my control? What am I going to focus on? Am I going to focus on how obnoxious they are and what they are doing that is making me crazy? Am I going to focus on I am probably feeling what they are feeling internally because that's often what happens. What is in my control? What is out of my control? I'm going to acknowledge that I'm having these thoughts, but I don't have to get them kind of revved up by reinforcing and ruminating. I am going to deliberately connect with my body. I'm going to feel my feet on the floor. I'm going to put my hands on my lap or on the, notice that I'm sitting on the chair. I might even, I do this. If you saw the second Inside Out, you saw her doing this kind of reconnect. And then I'm going to do whatever it is I need to do based on my values, based on how I want to be, not on my reactivity. I'm going to skip the CBT because I have taken too long. But basic ideas, changing feelings requires you to either change your thoughts or your behaviors. And that is harder to do than it sounds, but extremely possible. Yeah, this is the last thing I want to make sure I show you because this is like one of the great truths of life. This is American Girl. I give this to adults. So this is the idea with CBT and thoughts. So her feelings are Ellie and Leah went to the mall without her. That hurts, which affects her thoughts about herself. They don't like me anymore. They must be mad at me, which change her behavior. She's walking away, pretending she doesn't see them. If they're mad, I'm not going to talk to them. What's the point? And then their reaction is, what's up with Alex? She must not want to hang out with us anymore. Let's just go without her. And then it goes in that circle. This is like one of my favorite tools in the entire world. And regardless of gender, regardless of age, it is just such a universal truth in how we react. And when we know how we react, we can change how we react. We have to know it and recognize it. And so teen brains are under construction. There's so much change that's happening. The emotions are much bigger before the other parts are. It's incomplete development. That is developmentally appropriate. It's not their fault, not their choice. Feelings are crucial. They're not being fragile. They're not being weak. Naming feelings and understanding the role they play makes all the difference. When you can connect with your teen in a way that is co-regulating, that is syncing with them, you are going to literally offer calm through your body in a way they can understand before they're going to take in your language. You can model the healthy habits. That's actually really important. Kids really need more sleep, and more exercise, and you can care for yourself because this is really hard. Thank you. Here's the last part, which is some books that I really like about parenting, in no particular order. Okay, so I will stop sharing, and I'm sorry I went a little over.
Wow, that's okay. And you don't have to take the slides down. It didn't really go over because we have 10 minutes, so people can ask
Oh,
questions.
okay.
Um, and Lindsay was saying you were amazing. You have no idea how timeless was, even for me, who isn't a parenting a teenager, but the big emotions are showing up big this week, which is so true. Big emotions are showing up big.
So, you know what I'm going to do that I never do? So I'm going to say that my son, who I don't talk about my kids, and he I think would be okay, was struggling, and I called you guys. And
Mhm.
you guys stepped in for him immediately and made all the
Mm.
difference. And I mean, it has just changed it because he went from TC Williams to a very hard school. And it was a huge change. And Lindsay, I can't even tell you. I'm so grateful to what you guys did. It is real, it works. He would sing your praises if he was here.
Oh, that is so sweet. Well, we really appreciate that, and all that goes on definitely to Lindsay. So thank you for saying that and sharing that. She said, "What an honor. He's an amazing human." But I wanted to, if you don't mind, since we have a few minutes, and I know parents want to kind of like that's a lot of information
It
to
was a lot
absorb.
of
I want
information.
to.
I'm sorry.
It's amazing information. I want to summarize it a little bit and maybe ask a question that might be helpful for the parents. So, first of all, what we're hearing is that kids have these really big emotions because their emotional center is leading the way, right? It's in charge. It's not fully connected to the prefrontal cortex. That prefrontal cortex fully develops in your late 20s, right? Mid to late 20s. And so for me, as a 26-year-old, I'm still hoping to eke out a few more years of development.
Can't, right?
And
Yeah.
so when we have that and we have all our fears ourselves, we can tend to climb the ladder, right, with kids, and we can tend to, I don't want to say make things worse, like there's a blame and shame on parents, but we can all make things worse because we have the brain development to say, okay, I know that those emotions that they're having, they maybe can't recognize yet or they can't control yet. And so, talk for a second maybe about the concept of validation, because I know that's something that we talk a lot about, but sometimes it's hard to validate when we really don't agree or we're not happy with what kids are saying to us. And I know that validation doesn't mean that you have to agree, but maybe help people understand that moment when your kid's doing something really crappy or you're really worried, as you said, about them. So, how does that work? How can we help them?
Yeah.
Obviously, and it's nothing's going to get solved in the moment anyway because they're completely emotionally overwhelmed. But why don't you talk a little bit about that?
That's actually a really good point too, is that a lot of this is coming back after that emotion, because in that emotion it's really hard. Validation, when I am with a kid who is not my kid and I am working with them on validation, it is so much easier because I don't have that personal kind of, this is for your own good. It's my own serenity now tension of I have to do this. And there is something that happens in us as parents where we feel really in charge. We need to protect, we need to save them from themselves. And this is the age where we start to let them do more. Trying to save them from themselves tends to reinforce whatever it is we're trying not to, because our own anxiety gets in the way. Validating is being curious. Validating is listening and asking questions rather than saying, what were you thinking? This is the dumbest thing you've ever done. It's more about, okay, what happened? Just kind of talk me through it, and trying to get their perspective, and also understanding, naming the feelings with them. If they aren't doing it, naming it, and trying to say, okay, I understand you were feeling this at that moment. Is that right? Okay. What was going on that led you to feel there? Just exploring with them, and then coming back to, okay, this is really hard. I love you. We got this. We're in it together. I know you have the strength to get through this. And then whatever tools come up, it is counterintuitive. We want to just lose our minds in those moments because we are so scared for
Mhm.
them. But if we can recognize that and regulate ourselves, it changes that interaction.
And so oftentimes I think as parents, so if we can do that, if we can help better seek to understand rather than blame and shame, which is, I know, a hard thing to do. But if we can seek to understand, and we also feel that maybe they did something that was inappropriate or not to our value system, then what? Then how do we manage that?
So we
Because
don't do it.
now,
Yeah. We come
yeah.
back to it, right? And so it depends on what it is, but generally, if it's not in our value system, it's often not in theirs. And so when we are dysregulated, we are highly defensive. So no matter what you say to me, it's kind of like that, you're stupid. No, you're stupid. We kind of just go back and forth. We're going to these old neural paths that we've always done, the snow tunnels about, we're back in this situation. And instead it's about getting them to recognize, well, do you share these values? Is this just me? Where are you with this? How does this feel to you? And what do you want to do about it? I love apologies. I have a 5-step apology I'm really obsessed with, but it's about naming what we do, expressing regret, taking responsibility. And even if you don't mean it, I'm okay with it. It's coming back to, we all screw up, we all make mistakes, we can make amends. And this is not who we are. That's something I say to parents a lot of. This is not whoever, Bobby. I know Bobby. He is at his core, his Bobby-ness is this wonderful, delightful, loving person. He is acting in a way that is not like him. And Bobby's like, yeah, I am, and feels terrible and feels ashamed.
Mhm.
So how do we come back, see that kind of golden part of that kid and name it so they feel the positive regard, so they have the ability to have mistakes, have express shame, express regret, and it doesn't have to go inside.
Mhm. Yeah, which I think is really critical. The way that we talk about it all the time is preserving the relationship. So we obviously have parents who are fighting oftentimes with kids about their homework. And even we had a question specifically around, kids that are feel that shame and that blame and they're resistant to getting help. And we know that we have to preserve the relationship. And one thing I'll say as we're kind of wrapping up this part, but I'd love to get your comment on this, is that I think oftentimes some of the challenges we don't even recognize as parents is that we have this unbelievable amount of anxiety that's coming from like the outside in. So, for example, in the school world that we know, if our kids don't get these great grades, if our kids don't do really well, then they're not going to get into these college. They're not going to do well in their SATs. They're going to have, a challenge in life because there's so much pressure to do exceptionally well. And so if they didn't do well on that test, then they end up feeling that blame or shame or that from something from their parents because maybe they don't know how to help. So the question is, how do you manage that type of situation, or how do you talk? Maybe what advice do you have for parents of like that feeling of noticing in ourselves that maybe what is really driving our reaction?
Well, I think it's
Does
just
that make
that.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's noticing in ourselves what is driving that reaction. What is it
Mhm.
going on with me and my values that is having this effect on my kid? Is this helpful to her? Is this hurtful to her? And looking at that, because generally it's hurtful, right? Like we don't do well when people
Mhm.
yell at us. And that can be an effective thing for parents, is just like, this is actually going to cause more damage, getting them to do self-reflection. But I think we have to know our own fears. And I think we have to be really careful we're not projecting. And when we do inevitably project, we have to recognize it, own it, and go back and have that conversation with our kid. These are,
And
like teens. They can get that. They can understand it.
yeah. And so finally, as we're kind of wrapping up, as we're walking away, the next time we have an interaction that feels heated with our child, can you help remind us, like, what are one or two or three things? I know you talked about all of these in the presentation, but like, just can you help remind us? Like for me, it's that breath. Like I have to, and I love the how you said say your own name because I often do that in my own brain. Like, okay, Debbie, because I get a lot of things from my kids. There are texts that make me immediately anxious. And so it seems like in the heat of the moment, it'd be great to have some kind of phrase or something. In fact, we just got this question that might help us calm down. What might you say to a parent to like, what can we say to ourselves that might
Well,
work?
and I think it's unique to everyone because I mean, at different stages in my life, I've had different lines that I use, but it is something meaningful to you that communicates this is not who you are. This is not who your child is. How do you stop? That was one of the acronyms with the DBT thing. Kind of observe it and pull back for a minute. For me, who is my child? Like, what is, this is, if I go to the things I love about my child, it feels very different. I have a really cheesy thing I do where I imagine love to them and it's different for each of them. And I can kind of visualize, like my oldest has like these rays of love and I see that in my mind. Like I do all kinds of crazy stuff. It helps me because it helps me ground back to, this is not an enemy. This is not somebody who's trying to ruin her life. I do not have the control that I would like. We need to be able to relate to each other. And I think finding those things is unique because it doesn't work for everyone, but there is something that will work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to Teresa, I mean, I think in terms of the script, and Elisa, you tell me you're the expert, but I think where we'll end is I think the challenge is having the script in your head that takes you out of that moment. Because when we're in that moment, we're going to just keep climbing the ladder. And so sometimes it's sitting down, changing your physical change, but like position, right? Sometimes it's pulling yourself out, asking yourself those questions, showing that ray of love, right? That you're talking about, remembering that you want to have a relationship with your child that is beyond this, right? That you want to preserve that relationship. And so I think that those are really critical pieces of advice in terms of understanding how can we help to manage those emotions and manage the situation the way we want to instead of the way that we feel out of control.
That's the snow tunnel. We go down that snow tunnel. We are not meaning to. That is grooved in our brain. And if we notice it, it's like, okay, I don't have to do this anymore. Just noticing it and preparing yourself if you see a fight coming. Okay, when I feel this way, what am I going to do? What am I going to say to myself? And that's the same with your kids. Nothing good happens in a heated argument, right? We are modeling calm, but we may not be our best self. But there's so many moments to connect and come back and say, like, okay, how do you feel about how we handled that?
Yeah, I love that. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so
Oh,
much. We're
thank
super
you. It's a
grateful. Thank
pleasure.
you for providing some visibility inside the brain this morning while we're all having our coffee. Really appreciate it. And we will definitely share all of the resources and the links to everything. So thank you so very much. Everybody said thanks, thank you, and great advice. So thanks for everyone who hung in there to the end. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next month.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care, Lisa.
Bye.